CBT Nuggets JNCIS Security Series, Junos CLI for the SRX. Well, in this nugget, we're going to kind of cover some fundamental basics, just in case you are brand new to the CLI and to the Junos operating system. Chances are you have some experience there, so if you want to, you could just bypass this nugget and go right to the next one if you want to. However, you may find a few cool things, because I got some great tips and tricks here that I'm going to turn you on to in the Junos CLI. But we're going to build a foundation to make sure that before we get in and configure the SRX, we're familiar with how to move around and to leverage and get the most out of the command line interface in Junos. You ready? Let's do it. Okay, let's go ahead and get connected to our SRX. I'm going to assume you're using a 210 or a 100. Either way, here's what we're going to do. Now, my configuration is different. This is actually one of the workstations I use. It's an Optiplex 990. Pretty beefy, and so this is the rollover cable here. This connector, this RJ45 connector, will connect right into there, okay, into that COM port. And by the way, if you're using a laptop or some other system, it may not have one of these. This is kind of an older serial port, and so you may not have that serial port. If you don't, you're probably going to have to get a USB to serial adapter. I actually have a Origin workstation that doesn't have one of these COM ports on it, these serial ports, so I use a TripLite. Jot it right here, TRIPP-LIT. Serial, so it basically has this, a kind of a female connector for this particular end of the cable, and then it connects to a, a USB connector. So on my Optiplex here, I could plug this connector into this serial port, and then of course this will go into the console port directly on my SRX 210 or my SRX 100. Now that's the way I'm going to go ahead and do this just for the sake of this example, but typically I will have this included with the rest of my rack of my equipment, and I'll actually have a access server in between this. So this is actually connecting to the access server, and the access server has 16 octal, has 2 octal cables with 16 cables that connect to all of the devices in my rack of equipment. But let's just do it the good old-fashioned way, a directly connected console session. I'm going to go ahead and use TerraTerm Pro. There's a bunch of tools out there. You can use, I don't know, Poderosa, Secure CRT, Putty. There's many of them, but TerraTerm is kind of a classic, been around for a while. So what you're going to want to do is, if you go to Setup here, you see the serial port. Whatever your serial port is, mine is COM1. So to connect directly to the console port, I'm going to set up my TerraTerm for COM1, 9600 baud rate, 8-bit data, parity none, stop 1 bit, and no flow control. Okay, so that's the setup I'm gonna do, and then I can just hit enter, and then boom, there we are. I just finished the Healthcare IT Technician series, so maybe I think I'll use that as my real-world example here. Let's say that you've just got hired on at Nugget Labs, which is a satellite lab for a large pharmaceutical company. You just installed your SRX series device. So what we see here, if we type in root, and by the way, I can see a date and time stamp in the Junos operating system at 12.1 R3.5. Let me go up here and clear the screen. This is the shell prompt, right? Now at this point, we're actually at the kind of the root of the operating system. We are not in the command line interface. So we have to get into the CLI. We do that by issuing the command, well, you guessed it, CLI. And so now we are in what's called operational mode. You know you're in operational mode because you have the greater than symbol there. So what we can see is there's no initial password for the root user. But before I'm able to make any changes to this SRX device and commit my configuration changes, I'm going to have to go ahead and create a root password. I'll have to set that. It won't let me. It'll bark at me. Okay? And we'll see that here in a second. Now, did I have to log in as root user? No, I could have put in some other user, some non-root user if it exists. For example, I don't know, SRX user, and then supply the password. I haven't created that user yet, but we'll do that here in a minute. Now, by the way, you're in operational mode. What can you do? Okay, well, you can do operational commands, like you can change the display state, the status of the device. Typically, you're going to say, what's going on the device? Maybe perform some troubleshooting. It's not configuration. Let's put it that way. So I could do show commands, monitor commands, things like that. I could even clear some things out. But let's say, for example, you don't know anything about the CLI. You've never taken a CBT nugget from Michael Shannon, and you just jump on this SRX and you're ready to go to town. You want to figure it out on your own. You're one of those kind of people, like guys who don't read the instructions to put their kids' bikes together, or people who don't use a map to drive from one place to the other. Well, you could just say help, type in the word help. Here you could say I want to find information about a topic, like help apropos. I could say help give me reference information. For example, if I want to say help reference, and by the way, I can hit the space bar to complete that statement, right? Help reference, the space bar, the tab key, either one of those is going to fill it in for me. Autocomplete. I want to say, let's say help reference security, and then what can we do there? Put a question mark in there, lots of stuff, okay? There's only 3% of the commands, so there's a ton of commands under help reference security. Control C, though, gets me back to that command. Help reference security, maybe I want to look up information on, I don't know, how about screen security? So we're seeing kind of our reference and topic information, different levels of subtopics and so on. Hit the space bar, I get through more of this. So I'm seeing kind of the subcommands underneath security, screen security. The help feature, very, very powerful, and one that you're going to want to use on a regular basis. Now, what if you're looking for a particular command? Like, what's the appropriate command, for example? Well, let's say help apropos. Let's see all the commands that match the, how about flow option? We'll talk more about that later, okay? If you want to find a particular specific command to do a specific task, then this is a good idea, okay? So clear flow information, clear flow statistics, show flow session, and a flow, by the way, I'll define that later on. We're going to talk about TCP and how a firewall looks at that particular protocol, and we'll talk about flows. Which, by the way, reminds me of that movie Dumb and Dumber, when Lloyd Christmas is sitting there in the booth at the diner, and that waitress walks by and he goes, excuse me, Flo, and he starts cracking up for no reason because of, I guess, that old sitcom with Mel and Flo, the waitress. I think it was actually Rhoda, and I'm really embarrassed that I know that, okay? So Control C gets you back to the operational mode prompt. Now, obviously, I can do a question mark. You can see the things you can do in operational mode. You can clear, you can get help, you can load, you can do monitoring, you can do ping. Okay, you can request, you can restart, you can save, you can do telnet, test, traceroute, a lot of things you can do here, okay? But really where the action is configuration. Configuration mode. How do I get to configuration mode, you ask? Pretty simple, just type in CONF and hit enter, okay? See that pound sign? I'm now in configuration mode. Okay, so I'm the root user in configuration mode. If I want to get back to the previous mode, I could do top. I'm at the top of configuration. Let's do exit. Let's do exit, gets me back to operational mode. There we go, back and forth. I'm not done in operational mode. I might want to see information about, I don't know, this device. How about show interfaces? See all the information about my interfaces, very important. Fast Ethernet 000. These are all physical interfaces. We'll talk more about that later on, but really the physical interfaces, you can't really do much with them until you attach a logical interface to the physical interface. So really, the physical interface, to have any other properties besides things like the link level type and the interface index and class of service queues and all the kind of low level layer 1 and layer 2 stuff, has to really have a logical interface assigned to it. For example, here's physical FE001. It's got a logical interface assigned to it, FE001.0. As we can see, that's where we can actually have some other attributes assigned to it. For example, what protocol is assigned to it? Well, Ethernet switch protocol. That's what really makes this physical 001 be able to do anything. I can hit the space bar and go look at all my interfaces, or I can see, and you can notice on the SRX here that these physical interfaces already have a logical interface assigned to them. In other words, they're Ethernet switch interfaces. Let's hit Control C. Let's go back to configuration mode and check out some stuff we can do there. I'm going to clear my screen on a pretty regular basis so I can get my prompt back up here at the top. Okay, I'm still in configuration mode. One of the first things you're going to want to do on the SRX series is make sure that you set an administrative user. Okay, you don't want to keep logging in as root. It's not a secure thing to do. From a physical security standpoint, it's dangerous. Okay, so we want to go ahead and create a super user. So I will set the system, and the system login will be for a user named, how about M. Shannon? And what class is this user in? This isn't do I have class, because I don't. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so mshannon class, and this is kind of a role-based access control methodology, right? You have these four roles: the operator role, the read-only role, the super user role, and of course the unauthorized role, which has no permission. So I want to be a super user. So it's basically one level below the root user, but it's the highest level administrative user on this device. So the class I'm in is the super user class. Okay. Now I don't have a password yet, so let's go ahead and set that. Set system login user mshannon, and we'll say the authentication is going to be a plain text password. Okay. So they're going to prompt me and ask me for my password. So my new password is, and let me tell you something. I know you've heard that you want to use, multiple characters, uppercase, lowercase, symbols, and numbers, all that kind of stuff. That's true, but really, the longer the password, the better. Okay, I could take 3 words. Let's say, if I'm a Steelers fan, for example, I could say great dot place dot steal. Okay, those 3 5-letter words separated by a dot or a dash. So if I said something like GREAT dash place dash steal, that's a very strong password, okay, believe it or not. But I'm in a pretty safe lab environment, so I'm just going to say Nugget Lab. Why not? Okay, so it's telling me I need a change of case, digits, or punctuation. All right, so capital N-U-G-G-E-T, capital L-A-B. Let's go back up here. Do that again. Capital N-U-G-G-E-T, L-A-B. Retype it. Okay, so there we go. So now I've got a user called mshannon, and I have got my password. Now, right now, I'm just kind of basically working in a candidate configuration, which means it hasn't really been committed to the operating system yet. Now, if I want to check out what I've done so far to see if I've done anything in error, I could say, okay, let's commit check. So it basically says, okay, so in your configuration, in your candidate configuration, is there anything that's kind of iffy or been misconfigured? Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to commit this configuration, okay? And it's telling me something, okay? It's telling me you cannot configure this system. You cannot commit this change until you have created a root authentication. In other words, my root user doesn't have a password yet. So, and like I mentioned this before, it's not going to let me commit any changes. Now, the whole commit thing is an entire kind of architecture. You can do all types of rollback mechanisms. You can commit within a certain period of time, for example. I mean, I could say I want to commit at, and actually put in a time that I want to activate the changes. Now, I know that I have to go and create a root level password before I can commit my changes, so let's go ahead and do that right off the bat. Let me show you one more cool thing that I can do before I actually do that configuration. It's called commit confirmed. Commit confirmed basically says, look, you might want to try your candidate configuration on for size before you commit it. So you might be saying, look, I want to go ahead and wait 10 minutes. And if I don't explicitly type the commit command in the next 10 minutes, then don't commit it. Okay. So if I just say, and I could do, by the way, I could do longer than 10 minutes or shorter than 10 minutes, but that's the default. Okay. And it's telling me, okay, so we really got to get that password set up. Okay. So we're going to set the system, and this is going to be root authentication, right? That's what we need to do. And we'll go ahead and do plain text password. And hit enter. It'll prompt us with the password. I like Nugget Lab, so I'm going to stick with that convention. Ask me to retype it, which I didn't do correctly, so let's go back and do it again. I hate this keyboard. Okay, have I mentioned that? Do not like this keyboard. There we go. Okay, now if I try to do a commit confirmed, it's going to give me 10 minutes. Okay, and if I do not do a commit statement within the next 10 minutes, it's not going to keep any of the configuration I've done, which means, and it tells you, commit confirm will be automatically rolled back in 10 minutes. So here's the cool thing. You just get on this SRX at Nugget Labs, go ahead and do something like commit confirmed 30. Okay, so you can play around for 30 minutes, do whatever you want to, because you're in a candidate configuration that's tied to your user. In my case, it's user root, but it could be user M Shannon, it could be user your first initial, your last name, super user. So each user who logs on actually has their own candidate configuration. Why is that important? Well, multiple administrators could be logged on to a device at the same time. That way they're operating on the Juniper SRX, and their configuration that they're doing, playing around for 30 minutes, is not going to affect some other user who's also playing around, or maybe some administrator who's actually doing something on that particular SRX device. So it's really excellent to have that candidate configuration tied to your user account. So I've got 10 minutes. If I do not issue the commit command or commit and quit, either one of those, it's not going to save my changes. It's not going to save my root authentication plain text password and user. It's also not going to save the user M Shannon, who's a super user, with the password Nugget Lab as well. But I'm going to go ahead and do commit, and I can even do commit. Well, let me see what my options are here. Okay, I can do commit at a certain time. I told you that. We can do a commit check, which means make sure everything's done properly. Well, let's just check that out. Commit check. Okay, the configuration check succeeded this time. Why? Because I went ahead and put in my root authentication password for the root user. So now I'm good to go. I can also do a comment. I've already seen confirmed, okay, which means automatically roll back if not confirmed by default in 10 minutes. I can even pipe it to some other command. We'll talk about the pipe symbol later on because we're going to use that quite a bit. But I can do commit and quit. That's kind of a cool one. That means commit and quit configuration mode. Excellent. So I quit configuration mode. Now I'm back in operational mode. I can show my configuration. Notice when I put in the first 3 letters of a command and I don't provide enough uniqueness, right? I need to add another N or an F in there so it knows what command I want to do. It gives me a couple of possible completions. So show con wasn't good enough, okay? I need to put show conf to do show configuration. And what's interesting is if you come from a Cisco background, the show configuration command output is going to be drastically different than what you're used to seeing. Now, I really want to recommend to you, if you have the ability, if you are unfamiliar with the Junos CLI, try to go back and look at my JNCIA series because I go through excruciating detail on all this type of stuff in operational mode and in configuration mode. I just don't have time to do it here. We've got to get into security quickly. But this type of syntax is kind of unique to Junos, okay? But I can see here's the user that I actually just created, okay, M Shannon, and I'm of the class super user. And then my password was actually Nugget Lab, but it's been encrypted. And you can see other services. We'll talk about services, SSH, Secure Shell, Telnet, Web Management, DHCP. A lot of these are just default behaviors, default IP addresses on my interfaces. So the way this is displayed may take some getting used to if you're new to Junos, okay? But once you get it figured out, it's more from a programmer standpoint. If you've done any kind of programming or scripting, this is much more user friendly. And I'll just tell you, the CLI is where it's at. That's the one thing about learning the CLI is that it's going to be common to every Juniper device, okay? The web, the GUIs, those can differ, okay? The graphical interface can differ, but you can go onto any Juniper device into Junos, and without any problem you can get around, okay? So you really got to master it, all right? So there's the show configuration. Now, what if I was in configuration mode? You can tell I've been on Cisco devices too, configure T. So I get back to configuration mode, okay, root user configuration mode, and I want to issue a command that I would need to be in operational mode to do, okay? Well, if you're a Cisco person, you may remember that you can do, okay? Do allows you to do things in other levels that you can't do at that level, but that's not the case here. Here I do run and then show configuration. If I'm in configuration mode and I want to use an operational mode command, just put the word run in front of it, okay? Control C gets me out of there. Beautiful. Okay, something else I might want to do that's going to be pretty much standard operating procedure is I want to set the host name. Okay, set the system, and I can autocomplete that host name. Let's call this Nugget SRX. There we go. And I want to go ahead and commit that right away. Now notice that I'm logged in as the root user at Nugget SRX. There we go. And by the way, it's been committed, so it's part of the system configuration. I might want to set the domain name. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Let's set the system domain name. Heard that little boop in the background. We are in the domain nuggetlab.lab. Okay, so my fully qualified domain name of this device, which is important because when I get into certificate services, when I identify this SRX appliance, well, what is my fully qualified domain name? Okay, I will actually seed the key pair, right? So I am nuggetsrx.nuggetlab.lab. That's my FQDN. Now, what if I just want to show information about one single interface? Let's say I want to, and this is operational, so I'm going to say run show interface, and how about just fast Ethernet 000? I don't want to see all my interfaces, just fast Ethernet. Okay, it's my first one, right? 000, first module, first slot, first port. Physical link is down, nothing's plugged into it. Okay, source filtering disabled, flow control enabled. That's a good thing. And you can see it's got a logical interface already set up on it. Remember, the logical interface is really what gets the settings, the stuff above layer 2. So this .0 here is really kind of a sub-interface. Okay, it's the first default sub-interface assigned on physical interface fast Ethernet 000. Okay, so the settings, these settings that we see here, are really applied to this logical interface, or in Cisco vernacular, it's a sub-interface. It's the first one. We also see some other stuff that's kind of interesting here. Stuff like security zone, it's in the untrusted security zone. What traffic is allowed in band? Well, not much. DHCP and TFTP. That's not a very productive network, okay? So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about zones and all that good stuff. But I think that pretty much covers some of the basics of the CLI. Like I said, please, if you can, get access to my JNCIA nugget and go through the first 4 or 5 nuggets there. Or go do some homework on the Junos. And as we go through my SRX, we will be in the CLI almost exclusively, and I'll promise to turn you on to other cool stuff, and we'll kind of learn as we go in the CLI as we actually configure this security device in a real-world environment. Let's exit out of here. Do I want to exit with uncommitted changes? No, I don't. Okay, I've made a change I want to commit. So let's go ahead and commit and quit. So I'm going to go ahead and commit the changes, which is, as we remember, the domain name, for example. Operational mode, I can exit here, and now it takes me to the root, exit again, and now I need to log in. Could I log in as M. Shannon? Yeah. Do I know the password? Well, I hope so. And now I'm logged in as M. Shannon at Nugget SRX. I can pretty much do most of the same things because I'm a power user. Okay, but I'm not logged in as the root user. I'm logged in as the power user, administrative user on this SRX, which, by the way, is the recommended way to do it. Okay, so from now on, I'm going to log on as M. Shannon. Let's play around with the CLI some more. I want to vary my output. Okay, I'm in operational mode, so we'll do the show command. Let's do the show interfaces, but this time we've got some other options. Let's do a show interface terse. Okay. Show interfaces terse gives you just a quick and, I don't know, down and dirty look at the interfaces. And you can see we've got other types of physical interfaces up here. Okay, we'll talk about some of these a little bit later, but the ones we're really focusing on, we're really primarily interested in, are these fast Ethernet interfaces, which of course all have logical interfaces already assigned to them. And that's the way it's going to be on the SRX and the switch. Okay, if I were on a router, these physical interfaces wouldn't have any logical interfaces configured for them. Because on a router, Juniper is not really sure if you want that port to be a Ethernet switch port or a routed port. So it's going to kind of, give you an empty configuration on those interfaces. Here, these are all Ethernet switch types, and they're all down. Okay, there's nothing connected to them, which is fine out of the box here. Okay, so that's one way you can look at it. You can also see we have loopback interfaces as well, and some other special types that you'll never even actually deal with. Okay, so that was a command. Show interfaces terse. You can also do show interfaces brief, which if you're a Cisco person, you're probably more used to using the brief command like show IP interface brief, or on an adaptive security appliance, show interface IP brief. Actually, on a Cisco device, the brief command is kind of the equivalent of the terse command. So if you did a Cisco brief command, it's going to look more like that, okay? More like what you're seeing up here. The brief command here just basically gives you less information, okay, than we saw earlier on just a show interfaces command. So there's a lot of differences, okay, between Cisco and Juniper. And this nugget is not about the differences, but if you're used to both, you're already starting to see some things that are, way different than a Cisco environment. We could also do show interfaces, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. Show interfaces, there's a detail option, and that's going to be, of course, extremely detailed, where you really get into the the layer 1 and layer 2 aspects, every granular aspect of every physical interface. So that's got an immense amount of output. And by the way, I could pipe that to a file. Okay, if I wanted to use the pipe symbol, I'll show you an example of a pipe symbol here in a second. But you can pipe that to a function, or you can pipe it to a file if you wanted to like print this out, for example. I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to do that. So there's detail. There's also even more. Okay, there's extensive. See if that shows up. Yeah. So show interface is extensive, which is about the same as the detail command on show interfaces. But as you can see here, just really a lot of statistics. Okay, so those are how you can vary the output length. So that terse, brief, detail, extensive, I'm doing it here on the interfaces, but it can apply to a lot of things. Now, I mentioned the pipe symbol. So I might want to do a show interfaces, but I want to do a terse. I want to do a terse output, okay? But I want to pipe that to, how about count, okay? So I'm piping this to a function. So I'm basically taking all the information in the show interfaces command terse output, piping it to the count, and it's telling me, hey, guess what? If you do a show interfaces terse, there's going to be 49 lines. Okay, so I don't know how practical that is. If you were just curious, how much output you're going to get, you could just quickly do that and go, hey, wow, that's a lot of output. So for example, we could say show interfaces extensive. If we pipe that to the count function, it's going to tell us, wow, you're going to have 2003 lines. All right, big difference between terse and extensive, and we used our pipe symbol there. And like I mentioned, we're going to use that pipe symbol a lot. We can pipe it to an exception function, which means, show me the terse information except for certain interfaces. Okay, I could say, show interfaces, and then pipe it to a find function where you want to find just a certain word. Like, well, let's do that. Let's do show interfaces terse. Well, let's do an interface fast E000 extensive, and then we'll pipe that to the find function, and we want to find any alarms. That's always a good thing to look for. Okay, and you can see we're showing the alarms on fast 000. Okay, so the pipe symbol, we'll use it a lot. It's a very powerful feature, and the more experience you get in Junos, the more comfortable and the more extensively you're going to use that pipe function. All right, let's go ahead and get back to this. I'm going to clean up my screen here. Now we've looked at the commit statement and how we're committing our configuration. I also talked about how you have a candidate configuration that's tied to your user account, whether it's the root user or mshannon. I want to talk about the rollback feature, which This is one of the things that really sets Junos apart from the router iOS that Cisco has. So for example, let's go into the configuration mode, and I want to do a rollback question mark. Now, this was a fresh SRX when I began this particular nugget here. So all of the changes that we see here that have been done basically over this period right here. Okay, so September 4th, 2012. And so you can see we have the ability to roll back to one level, two levels, three levels. So every time I committed a change, it created an entry here. Okay, so I could roll back to the last change I made, which would, if I did a rollback 1 right now, it's probably going to undo the configuration of my domain name, right? nuggetlab.lab. So one of the great things about this is I can roll back and I can even create a system backup. You don't see it here. I haven't created it. And we'll actually do this when we get into some of our deeper configuration, but I could create a system backup, and if I did, it would show up on this list, and I could roll back to that system backup, which is saved as a file, a configuration file in flash memory. This is kind of cool. Check this out. Let's do a show command, and I want to say I want to do a show command. I want to pipe it to the compare function, and let's say I want to compare what's in rollback number. Gotta get the other L in there. Let's see what's in rollback number 2. Haha, this is cool. So in rollback number 2 here, what I committed was, this is, I guess rollback number 2 is where I made this change. So this is a good way to find that out. So if I wanted to undo these two things, okay, so host name is when I named it Nugget SRX, and the domain name nuggetlab.lab. So I could roll back to a point before that, let's say rollback 3, and then I won't have these two settings anymore. So that's a cool thing. That pipe symbol really comes in handy. Now, if you want to get directly to some configuration part of the tree, you can just type in that kind of path. And if you think about, if you use things like Microsoft SharePoint or some, web interfaces, they'll have like at the top, they'll have like little greater than symbols, and it shows you the actual path that you're on. This is what for example, JWeb and Cisco's device managers all do that as well. They'll show you kind of the path, and you can click on it as a hypertext link. So if you wanted to get, for example, directly to, let's say, edit security, it takes you right to that area, and then you can see what commands can I issue in edit security. And if I wanted to go right to edit security annotate, I could have typed that in there, and I would be in that mode. And I can, by the way, at any time I can issue the command top, and it gets me back to the top of the hierarchy. The top of the hierarchy, as far as it's concerned, is the configuration mode. Okay, and I did this earlier by accident. Top, it tells you, hey, you're already at the top of configuration. Okay, if I want to get to operational mode, I need to do the exit command. Okay, so that's pretty interesting as well. And the more time you spend in the CLI, you'll be able to type in these commands and kind of get right into that configuration mode as well. So that's a really cool feature. Okay, I'm going to type in edit here, and it doesn't like that. Edit system, and we can show. I want to talk about this for a second. Okay, I've navigated to edit system and did a show command, and we're kind of back in this hierarchical view, which I mentioned. It makes a lot more sense to people who are doing scripting and programming, but this is a very common way to look at configuration listings in Junos. So you might want to become familiar with a couple of statements here. The first thing we have are container statements. So a container statement begins with a open paren. Okay, so one container statement is root authentication, and you can see the root authentication has this value, and it kind of closes up the container there. So it has an open curly bracket and a closed curly bracket. Here's the name server container. Okay, there's the open bracket, there's the curly bracket. So here's my name servers, DNS servers. Here's a login container for the user M. Shannon, and then of course it has sub content below that, right? And of course, if you've got two open brackets here, then you're going to have two closed brackets. So everything has to be, if you open it, you have to close it. Now, some of these things that end with like a semicolon, that's called a leaf statement. So it ends the hierarchy. There are no subordinate statements under this particular thing, class super user. So we've got container statements, which are the curly braces, and we have leaf statements. And so we can see here that we're in the configuration hierarchy of the edit system area of our operating system. Now, I mentioned this earlier. Notice how if I type in the top, I can go back to the top and I'll be at the configuration prompt. But you can do a couple of things. It's kind of like a hyperspace, okay? I could type top followed by edit and go to some other portion of the hierarchy. Okay, so I was in edit system. I said, okay, I want to go to the top. Then I want to go to this area, edit system login. And now I'm in the edit system login area, and I can do a show and see the hierarchy there. So you can, bounce around in the actual configuration hierarchy this way, and it's a very great way to do it. You can always, if you just get way down deep, you don't know where you are, just hit the top. Always get you back to the top. But like I wanted to show you, you can go to the top and then bounce somewhere else if you know the path. Okay, there's also, shortcuts we can do, right? And I'm not going to go through all these, but you should know these kind of just from working, on a keyboard in a console. The up arrow, the down arrow, the left arrow, the right arrow. Control A goes to the beginning of the command line. Control E, the end of the command line. Those would be good to know as well. Also, knowing at any time that you can do a question mark or you can do help question mark at any time. Okay. All right, I think that's a pretty good introduction to the CLI. Obviously, as we move through our different configurations in our real-world deployment of our SRX at our branch office or retail office or medical lab, whatever we want to, we'll have probably several different scenarios. We'll be learning more and more about the CLI on the SRX as we go. Okay, but that's a pretty good introduction. Hopefully, you'll get your hands on your own device and you can play around with it. Again, remember, until you commit something, none of those changes are going to be part of the configuration. And you can always do commit confirmed, 45 and play around for 45 minutes. And if you don't actually commit it during that time, it'll automatically take everything you've done and pretty much undo it. So keep those tips in mind, and you can go to town, for hours on SRX without ever making any changes to it. All right? Excellent. Well, all right. In the second nugget of this JNCIS security series, we looked at the Junos CLI for the SRX. Just an introduction, just getting our toe in the water. Some of the basics, maybe a refresher course for you. Maybe if you're brand new, it's kind of a primer or a primer for the CLI. And like I said, we'll be doing a lot more of this, looking at all these different commands in operational mode and configuration mode as we go through this nugget series. But I hope this CBT nugget was informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing. See you later.